Newton, Kansas, 1871. Back then, Newton was like Abilene, Dodge, or Wichita, a railroad town and cattle town stuck at the far end of the Chisholm Trail. Most ways, these places were about the same. Loose money, not much law and order, everybody wearing a gun, everybody drinking whiskey. The trouble began on the afternoon of August 11th with an argument and a fistfight between William Bailey, a professional gambler, and Mike McCluskey, a railroad yard foreman and security man. Needless to say, both men were drunk. The fight took place in the Red Front Saloon about 4 in the afternoon. McCluskey was a big man, and he knocked Bailey through the saloon doors and out into the street. Bailey got to his feet and went for his pistol. McCluskey did the same. A stare-down followed. Then McCluskey fired 2 shots. The second one hit Bailey in the gut. Bailey died the following day. Even though Bailey hadn't fired his gun, McCluskey claimed self-defense. One more item was to bear heavily on the situation. The dead man was from Texas. 2 days after the shooting, a herd of over 1,000 Texas cattle arrived in Newton. Several of the wranglers who had driven the herd were friends of Bailey. There was talk of revenge. On the night of August 19th, Mike McCluskey went to do some gambling at Perry Tuttle's dance hall. He was accompanied by another railroad man, a friend named Martin, Jim Martin. McCluskey sat in on a poker game for about an hour, then moved on to the faro table. Around that time, 3 of the newly arrived Texas cowboys entered the crowded dance hall. They were Billy Garrett, Henry Kearns, Jim Wilkerson. Maybe 10 minutes later, Hugh Anderson arrived. Anderson was another Texan, a cowhand, and it turned out another good friend of William Bailey. Hugh Anderson joined his 3 friends at the long bar, ordered a whiskey of his own. He wanted a double and he got it. Hugh Anderson was 22 years old. All smiles, the Texans clinked glasses, sipped their whiskey. Mike McCluskey just kept playing faro. Jim Martin kept an eye out, watching the Texans. An out-of-tune piano kept playing. Hugh Anderson finished his drink, then walked to the faro table. He immediately called McCluskey a coward. Said he was going to kill him. Anderson's slug got McCluskey in the neck. The impact from the bullet sent McCluskey to the floor. Jim Martin was now wrestling with Anderson. McCluskey got his pistol out, tried to shoot Anderson, but his gun misfired. Anderson broke free, stood over McCluskey, kicked him twice. Then as the fallen man tried to crawl away, shot McCluskey 3 times in the back. At the same time, on the other side of the room, Garrett, Kearns, and Wilkerson all began blasting away. Their volley of gunfire hit Jim Martin several times, also hitting McCluskey in the leg and hip. Then one more bullet hit him in the lung. Jim Martin ran out of the dance hall, got to the middle of the street, fell nose down in the dirt, and died. Back inside Tuttle's, there was a hellish mix of scattered patrons, smoke, blood, screaming, and dying men. And a new shooter was in the room, a friend of McCluskey, a man who didn't like Texans. This was James Riley. If that was his real name, no one knew where he came from. He was said to be just past his 18th birthday. He was said to be in trouble with the law. He was also said to be dying of tuberculosis. But he was a friend of McCluskey, and he stood by his friend. He wore 2 guns. He knew how to use them. He killed Garrett Kearns and one of the patrons who drew his pistol. In the mix of blazing gunfire, Riley badly wounded Hugh Anderson and Jim Wilkerson along with another bystander, an unlucky fellow who just got in the way. Riley finished the gunfight with both pistols empty and all of his opponents on the floor. Thinking his friend McCluskey was dead, Riley walked out of Perry Tuttle's dance hall, saddled a horse and left town within the hour. And with that, James Riley disappeared. Some believe he died from consumption soon after, and probably died under an assumed name. Others said James Riley was already an assumed name. Only one thing is certain. He vanished into the night and was never heard from again. It turned out McCluskey was still breathing. They lugged him over to a hotel room across the street, but his condition was hopeless. Mike McCluskey finally died the following morning. Died hard. His screams of agony could be heard all the way down to the cattle pens just outside of town. And what of Hugh Anderson? Hugh Anderson, who hailed from Waco and was said to be friendly with notorious John Wesley Hardin. Hugh Anderson, who was infuriated by the shooting of gambler and friend William Bailey. Hugh Anderson, who had endeavored to defend the honor of Texas and Texans. Hugh Anderson, who had fired the first shot, and for all his trouble been paid off in spades by Mr. James Riley. Hugh Anderson ended the evening being badly shot in both legs, taking another bullet through one of his hips and another high in the chest, smashing his collarbone. Remorseless James Riley left him for dead. Later, as all the bodies were being carried out, it got noticed that Hugh Anderson was still breathing. He got some medical care. They dug the bullets out, pumped him full of whiskey. Several of the Texas cowboys watched over him day and night. A week went by. No infection set in. Somehow Hugh Anderson got better. He started to get around on crutches. It was said a warrant would soon be issued for the killing of Mike McCluskey. So Hugh Anderson in the dead of night left Kansas by train, made his way back home to Texas, then settled in the Indian Territory to hide out and recover from his wounds. Hugh Anderson managed to stay out of sight for the next 2 years, but one thing was sure. Hugh Anderson was a marked man. One counts William Bailey from the week before. The fight that night in Perry Tuttle's dance hall had left 6 dead, 3 more severely wounded, 2 of them crippled for life. This is all true. You can look it up. But there was more to come. It would take a while, but the Anderson-McCluskey story wouldn't end without a proper conclusion. More blood and more revenge. In the next part of our story, the facts are not as certain. This much we know. Mike McCluskey had a brother. He was a year older and went by the name of Arthur. And Arthur McCluskey was not reconciled to Brother Mike's death. And he wasn't reconciled to the idea that Hugh Anderson had escaped proper retribution. Arthur McCluskey, like his dead brother, was a big fellow, and good with both fist and pistol. It took 2 years for Arthur McCluskey to find Hugh Anderson. And he did. On July 23, 1873, the New York World published a page-one story. The headline read, "Meeting of the Desperados Hugh Anderson of Texas and Arthur McCluskey of Kansas." The newspaper article then told the following tale, quote, "One of the most ferocious duels ever fought, both desperados well known for their recklessness of life, occurred on July 4th in Indian Territory. By the terms agreed upon, the antagonists were to fight to the death with pistols and bowie knives. The two duelists to be placed back to back at an interval of 20 paces, both men to wheel and fire at a given signal, and after the first shots, conduct the fight as each man should deem to best personal advantage." The spot selected for the encounter was on the open prairie, several hundred yards distant from Harding's trading post at the edge of town. About 70 locals showed up to watch. Bets were made. Most favored McCluskey. He was the challenger, the revenger, and the bigger man should it come down to hand-to-hand combat. It was early evening, almost sunset. Little time was wasted in preliminaries. 20 paces were stepped off. The spectators drew back to what was considered a safe distance. Both men stood on their marks, their backs to each other, statues looming against the fading light, both awaiting the signal. McCluskey was the first to fire, rapidly followed by Anderson's first shot. Then a momentary pause. Anderson had a deep furrow on the cheek, drawing immediate blood. McCluskey remained standing, appearing unharmed. But this was not the case. He jerked with a sudden spasm, then leveled his pistol and fired again. This time his bullet broke Anderson's left arm. The Texan screamed, fell to one knee, returned fire, this time with wicked effect. One of Anderson's bullets had torn through McCluskey's face, ripping away part of the jawbone, taking several teeth and some of McCluskey's tongue. Somehow McCluskey staggered forward a few steps, tried to steady himself, his mouth hanging open, blood pouring in torrents. Anderson fired another shot, which hit and broke McCluskey's shoulder. Anderson fired one more time, his last bullet, which hit McCluskey in the pit of the stomach. But McCluskey still had a close hold on his pistol. He aimed with great effort. Anderson was hit just below the belly button. He began writhing and twisting on the ground in uncontrollable contortions. Anderson, like McCluskey, was now a fast-dying man. The finale was now at hand, the curtain almost ready to drop. McCluskey somehow drew his foot-long bowie knife, began crawling toward Anderson. Both men had dropped their empty revolvers. Anderson, seeing the blood-covered McCluskey crawling toward him, was able to come up with his own blade. As McCluskey crawled within reach, Anderson caught him in the throat, cutting muscle, tendons, veins. The dying Anderson fell forward, and as McCluskey, gasping, went to meet his maker, he stabbed Anderson twice in the back, then fell dead across his opponent's body. There was no gambling in Medicine Lodge that night. Most folks figured there was plenty enough excitement just discussing the recent spectacle. The mangled corpses of the two duelists lay in repose on the trading post wooden porch. On that particular night, the moon rose at about 11 o'clock. The bodies of Hugh Anderson and Arthur McCluskey were carried out onto the prairie. No funeral ceremonies were performed, but out of respect, they were buried deep. No one present wanted the two brave men to be eaten by the wolves or coyotes.
How's that, bud? I don't know, Silas. I think you need to go deeper.
Okay, end of story. Now what's it all about? What, if any, lessons are to be drawn? Obviously, we can say whiskey and pistols are a bad mix, and that attempts for personal justice are often an excuse for violence. Those are easy judgments. But the dark side within us all has its own logic. Sure, we reach for the stars, and sometimes, truth be told, we reach for the bullet or the blade. The story that appeared in the New York World in 1873 is almost entirely false. None of the 70 witnesses were ever found, nor were there corroborating accounts by any official contemporary sources, nor was there a town or a village in the Indian nation called Medicine Lodge. And the newspapers in Kansas had immediately labeled the New York World's account of the duel a complete lie. Further research has shown that Hugh Anderson was alive until the year 1914, when he was killed by lightning. He was 62 years old. Despite all this, over the decades, the story of the duel at Medicine Lodge gained considerable credibility. Both casual and serious historians wrote it up as a near-ideal example of frontier justice and revenge. The duel that never happened was consciously or unconsciously understood to be a perfect complement to the shootout in Perry Tuttle's dance hall. As a poet said, sometimes the myth becomes the greater truth. And another poet said, when a legend becomes a fact, print the legend. So here we have it, a prime example of American Gothic, set on the vast prairies of the wilderness. It all speaks of the old republic and the West, the hard West, the ordeals of combat that define honor, the strict adherence to tribal codes, yet simultaneously behavior of reckless abandon. With death as a companion to chances taken, risks accepted, challenges met, and by God, most of it done with grit and a tear and a song and a smile. Or so goes the legend. But still, maybe it's not just a true anecdote, followed by a lurid falsehood. Maybe it's deeper, way beyond cowboys and saloons and pistols and Texans and whiskey and mysterious strangers and so many of our dark places. Maybe see it this way. Maybe it goes all the way back. The first stories told around campfires, Old Testament, or Homer in miniature, the Iliad writ small. It kind of tracks that way, beginning with a wrongful act, then wounded pride, moving to a battle royal, ending with a blood and thunder reenactment of Hector and Achilles, not before the walls of Troy, but within the dark confines of Mr. Perry Tuttle's dance hall. Or do we claim too much? Another case can be made. Just dumb drunken cowboys slugging and shooting it out over misbehavior by other dumb drunken cowboys. And for us to invest their actions with ideas of heroism, nostalgia, and primitive nobility, even in the poetic sense, is far more than the freight will bear. Or is it? This singer of tales detects the oldest of stories, and the old hard religion of courage, and the deepest melancholy of lost horizons. What say you, noble listener? What say you?